Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Senator Hatch for holding this very important hearing. It's been, as has already been noted, 2.5 years almost since the Finance Committee opened its bipartisan investigation into the IRS's targeting of social welfare groups based on their conservative political views. And I think the question we have to ask at this point is, what have we learned? Well, certainly that the IRS was guilty of gross mismanagement, or in the words of our ranking member, vast bureaucratic dysfunction. But I believe we do the American people a disservice if we attribute the inexcusable behavior of IRS employees simply to incompetence. To do so would ignore the fundamental problem at hand, the fact that the culture at the IRS allowed employees to believe that they could let their personal political views guide how they treated taxpayers, and that there would be no repercussions whatsoever for doing so. Simply put, we need a cultural change at the IRS. American taxpayers should expect at the very least a culture of accountability, of fairness, of impartiality. No taxpayer ever again should fear that they will be discriminated against based on their political or ideological beliefs. And so while I appreciate the changes the IRS is attempting to implement on their own, I believe that more needs to be done. And earlier this year, Senator Grassley and I introduced the Taxpayer Bill of Rights Enhancement Act of 2015, which is a series of measures to hold the IRS accountable to American taxpayers. Unfortunately, the IRS has lost the trust of the American people, and it doesn't have the credibility to make the necessary reforms on its own. And I believe that the Congress needs to act to ensure that taxpayer rights are protected and that there are real consequences when they're abused. And I hope that this committee can count on the support and cooperation of you, Commissioner, and other high-ranking officials at the IRS and Treasury as Congress considers new taxpayer protections. And with that, what I'd like to do is get your views on a few of what I think are the common sense proposals that Senator Grassley and I have in our legislation, and to make the IRS once again accountable to the American taxpayers. And I'm going to read through these and ask you to hold off on commenting until I get to the end, and if we can't address these, we can answer them for the record. But I want to get these questions in. The first one is that last year the IRS proposed its own Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And the question is, would you support legislation to codify these rights and to make it the official duty of the IRS Commissioner to ensure that IRS employees are familiar with these rights? So that's question number one. Second is the 10 deadly sins created by the IRS Restructuring Commission in 1998 requires mandatory termination of an employee who threatens to audit a taxpayer for personal gain. Would you support amending the 10 deadly sins to include threatening to audit or failing to perform an official action for political purposes? So that's question number two. Number three, in your recent letter to the committee, you stated that the IRS failure to preserve electronic records such as emails is clearly unacceptable, and you noted that the IRS is implementing records management improvements. Do you support legislation that would ban IRS employees from conducting official business over personal email, a measure that passed the House by a voice vote earlier this year? And also, do you support legislation that would codify the deadline by which the National Archives has required the IRS to put updated document retention policies in place? Finally, and the fourth question is, in keeping in mind that some conservative groups were stuck in limbo for up to 5 years on their application, would you support granting 501c4s the ability to file for declaratory judgment on their application if the IRS has not acted upon it after 270 days? And as you know, that is something that 501c3s already possess and access as a remedy. All of the measures I just mentioned are included in the Grassley-Thune Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And as I stated earlier, I hope that we can count on your cooperation on these measures and others that the committee might consider to restore the credibility and the integrity of your agency. So I say all that, ask those questions, and you maybe keep track of all that, but to the degree that you can comment on those, Commissioner, and then if you can't, we will certainly welcome that for the record.
Well, I'd be delighted to give you a more detailed answer for the record. I would note, when you note the changes on our own, the changes on our own are the changes in response to the recommendations of the bipartisan report, as well as recommendations in the majority and minority report. So these are not ideas that we have just by ourselves. We have said we'll take all of the recommendations we have control over that this committee has recommended in its report are necessary to make sure that the delays don't happen again. So it's not just us. We are actually doing everything you asked us to do. With regard to the Bill of Rights, as you noted, we pulled together the Taxpayer Bill of Rights over a year ago. We spent a lot of time trying to make sure taxpayers and employees are aware of those. They're all already codified in the statute. That's where we pulled them, why we pulled them together, so that they would be in one place. And we do think it's important. for those to be, we provide training on them for the employees. We think it's important for taxpayers as well as employees to know what those are. Codifying those and saying those are a Bill of Rights would be codifying the rights that exist throughout various statutes. We would be delighted to support the fact that those become an important part of the statutory framework, because they already are. What we've done is be able to make it easier for taxpayers to find them. With regard to official business on personal computers, that's a policy we already have. You are not supposed to do that. In fact, when I first started, I sent testimony home one day to my home computer so I could edit it, and the next morning got a note saying you're not supposed to do that. Somebody came to my office and said, "We assume you're editing testimony." I said, "That's right." Next thing I got was an office computer for home, so I would not, in fact, send anything to my home computer. So that's a policy that we have. We've enforced very stringently. It has security issues associated with it. It is a policy. If you wanted to put it in legislation, that would be, we'd be happy to have you do that. I'm not sure we need a lot of new rules for those things. Otherwise, I'd be delighted to get back to you. I think that clearly it's impermissible for anyone to use their political beliefs in doing any business at the IRS. I don't know what most people's political beliefs are at the IRS. And I would simply note again, I know Senator Scott feels strongly about this, but the Justice Department talked to 100 IRS employees, several of whom self-identified themselves as conservatives and Republicans. No one identified a single instance in which they were instructed or in which they knew of anyone who took an action because of their political beliefs. Lois Lerner clearly had very public beliefs. Those beliefs she's welcome to have in her personal life. They have no place and no role in the operations of the IRS. And I don't know of any other situation and indication. And even people who did not like Lois Lerner and didn't approve of her management talent, according to the Department of Justice, did not feel that those views had influenced the decision.
Colleagues, we're going to have to move on. Senator Roberts.